Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Amanda Lamb. In today's deep dive conversation, we're talking with WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief Laura Leslie about the Parents' Bill of Rights that requires teachers to notify parents if students are questioning their gender. Laura, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So, Senate Bill 49 has obviously been the center of a lot of debate. Explain it for us and tell us what the legislation would do.
Right. Well, overall, it sort of puts together a lot of things that are already in the law about what rights parents have in terms of their children's education and their children's medical care and health care. It sort of outlines those. That's why it's the Parents' Bill of Rights. So it does things, a couple things. One thing that it would do is ban any mention of sexual orientation or sexuality or gender identity from the curriculum or classroom materials in grades K through 4. So, for example, you might have a classroom teacher who likes to read a book about a transgender boy. That would not be allowed under this. And students could initiate, so it's not quite the same as the Don't Say Gay law, right? Because in Florida, they can't even talk about anything like that. But what it does say is if a student asks a question or brings it up, then they can have a discussion about it, but it should not be part of what students are, what they're supposed to be learning. So that's one part of it, and that has the LGBTQ community upset. And then another part of it is what you mentioned about students changing their name or their pronouns at school. And so it would require before a student would be allowed to use a different name or use a different set of pronouns, the parents would have to be notified. Now, the sponsors of the bill say that's because parents should know if something that major is going on in the life of their child. However, there's a lot of concern from the LGBTQ plus community and allies that, and for some of these kids, they may be out at school, but they may not be out at home because it may not be safe to be out at home. And outing that child could put that child in danger of maybe, abuse, maybe being kicked out of the house. Certainly, will have a chilling effect on any child who, wants to do this at school because their parents will have to be notified. And a lot of kids do socially transition at schools before they come out to their parents as a way of sort of getting more comfortable with what they're doing before they have to talk to their parents about it and risk rejection, of course.
And you touched on this. I mean, this is a largely Republican-backed bill. What do the sponsors say about the need for it and why now?
Well, they've been talking about this for some time. They say that a lot of parents feel basically shut out of their children's education. They feel like they can't get teachers or school administrations to respond to them. There's a lot of concern about what kids are being taught in classrooms. You see that a lot on Fox News and some other right-wing outlets about children being groomed is, I think, a term that's often used. If there's any discussion of LGBTQ issues in classrooms, there's a lot of concern from parents about inappropriate materials in libraries and curriculum. So this is partly in response to that. And then the part about notifying the parents seems to be sort of an anecdotal thing that parents have come up and said to the sponsors that this has happened with their children, and they didn't even know that their child was using different pronouns at school. And they found out about it months later. And so they say that is something that parents have a right to know. And they say that there should not be any expectation of confidentiality between a student and a teacher because a teacher is a state employee. And so therefore, there can be no confidentiality that doesn't involve a parent.
Does this fall down party lines? And what are Democrats saying about this?
It falls very much on party lines. Democrats are saying that this is anti-teacher, that it's going to pit teachers against students. That it's going to make teachers talk about a chilling effect. They're going to be afraid to talk about anything along these lines, even in the grades that go higher. And it's going to make kids afraid to talk to teachers about anything. Even if they're just talking to them, say they want to talk to their teacher and confide that they think they may be gay. Under this bill, the bill wouldn't actually specifically require the teacher to tell the parents that, but the teacher might feel like they needed to tell the parents just to avoid being possibly disciplined or sued.
So they would have to protect themselves under this law,
right,
which is tricky. So what is the governor saying, and what do you expect him to do if this passes?
He's signaled pretty clearly that he does not intend to pass this, to sign this. He intends to veto it. It would very much chill any discussion of that whole entire part of our community, in the schools, and would also really put teachers on notice and on guard, about everything that they're teaching in the classroom and about the kind of relationships that they can have with their students. And, teachers, educators, social workers have all said, this is a dangerous idea because a lot of kids do confide in their parents in the teachers because maybe they can't confide in their parents.
Understand that. Well, we'll be back after the break with more from Laura Leslie about reaction from some members of the LGBTQ community on Senate Bill 49. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm talking with WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief Laura Leslie about the Parents' Bill of Rights. Now, Laura, you mentioned in the first half, there's been a strong reaction from a lot of members of the LGBTQ community regarding the legislation. What's their main focus here on arguing against this?
Their main focus is the impact that it's going to have on LGBTQ youth. They are already, especially transgender youth, they're already far, far more likely to attempt and successfully commit suicide. They're also far more likely to self-harm. They're more likely to be bullied, and they're more likely to be killed. And so they say this is a very vulnerable segment of the population. And why are they being targeted, right? If it's not, this bill, then it's bathrooms or it's sports, it's all anti-trans kids, and they're also, they say, you've heard various people, including DHHS Secretary Cody Kinsley, for example, talked about how a teacher saved his life as a young man who was realizing that he was gay, and that's who he was able to talk to, right? And then we heard also Senator Lisa Grafstein, who is the only LGBTQ, I think openly LGBTQ member of the Senate, stood up and spoke during this debate. She talked about her experience and how important it was to her to be able to talk to teachers and to be able to sort of get that feedback from them and that reassurance from them that everything was going to be all right. It's a very touching speech, actually. So, this mostly the big concern here is for the families, LGBTQ families who feel like they're going to be erased from their kids' lives in the school, and then also about the youth themselves.
So are teachers' organizations coming out against this? I mean, how is that? What's happening on that front?
Very much so. Yeah, they are opposed to this because, again, it puts teachers at risk of disciplinary action or possibly lawsuits. If a parent decides that something that they're teaching, even in a higher grade, is inappropriate material, inappropriate is sort of in the eye of the beholder, I think sometimes. They say that it puts, it basically, the experts that put the curriculum together are going to be second guessed by, any parent who has, a grievance about a particular topic or thing. So, they see this as difficult and making their jobs harder. And they say when it's already hard enough.
You mentioned the parents who are for it because they were surprised to find out that their children were going by different pronouns and they had not learned about that from the school. Are there parents against it or do we know? Have you talked to any parents that are against it?
I do not know that. I mean, as empirically, but I will say that who showed up at the committees in terms of parents commenting on this, the parents that did comment were largely opposed to it. And a lot of those were parents of LGBTQ kids, or parents who themselves were LGBTQ, or parents who were just simply concerned about, what this would do to, the relationship between their child and teachers. So yeah, there are plenty of parents who are opposed to it.
Tell me about next steps in this legislation.
Well, it's made it through the Senate, so it's going to go to the House. Now, we've already been told by House leaders that they are likely to draft their own version of it. So it sounds like they may not take up the Senate bill, or they might simply rewrite it. But I don't get the sense that is moving quickly at this point. If it does get through both chambers and both chambers are able to agree on the same version of it, and it goes to the governor, and the governor is likely to veto it. This is another one of those where it's a one vote thing, to override a veto at this point. So if one Democrat votes with the Republicans in the House, or if two Democrats are simply absent one day when all the Republicans are present, then they can't override the veto. So it seems likely that what will happen is if it does pass and it is vetoed, they'll be holding on to it for a while, waiting to pull the trigger until the day when the mix in the chamber is right.
It makes me think about the fact that we're doing this story, and we did the story about the anti-rioting bill as well. It seems like anytime you're talking about culture, race, gender, These are hot button issues, and people get very emotional, I would think, in terms of how they look at these pieces of legislation.
They do. They're very polarizing, and they're polarizing in the debates and in the public comments, in the reaction to them. We see a lot of press conferences and protests. So it's very much culture war bill. I mean, all this, a lot of these bills so far that we've seen this year have been. And those are the bills that the Republican base want to see, right? And the Republicans won nearly a supermajority. So they say they have a mandate, to move forward with legislation like this, even though folks on the other side of the aisle, see it as sort of anathema, to what they believe in.
And I know you'll continue to follow this again years before something like this might go through. I mean, where is that process? It could go through in the next couple of months. It could go through at the end of the session. It could go through next year. It's hard to say. Okay. Laura, once again, thank you so much for your time and your insight. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and making us part of your morning routine. If you like what you're hearing, please rate us on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you use. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email waiting in your inbox every morning with Triangle News events and headlines to get you ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.
Like, share, and subscribe for the latest on North Carolina and national headlines you can't get anywhere else.